For weeks, Buckingham Palace was eerily silent. But behind those gilded doors, something was unraveling. Late-night meetings, burned documents, coded messages whispered through corridors. Then came the unthinkable: a confidential vote by the Royal Council, one that would shake the monarchy to its core. The question on the table: should Queen Camilla's name be erased from all future royal decrees? What began as a quiet disagreement was about to ignite a full-blown constitutional firestorm. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The silence of the palace was deceptive. To the public, everything appeared serene. State duties continued, formal engagements were fulfilled, and the king maintained his composed smile. But behind closed doors, tension simmered like a slow-boiling storm. The late-night meetings began innocuously, cloaked under the guise of administrative discussions. Yet those who attended knew the truth. The topic was far more dangerous than anyone dared to admit. What was at stake was not policy or protocol, but identity, legitimacy, and control of the royal narrative itself. Inside the council chambers, senior advisors sat in uneasy silence, aware that every word could later be weaponized. King Charles's inner circle had become divided, fractured between those who stood unwaveringly by Camilla and those who whispered that her presence had cost the crown its dignity. It wasn't the first time the monarchy had been tested by personal choice over public duty, but this time, the conflict wasn't merely emotional, it was institutional. Her name, carved into future royal decrees, symbolized not just partnership, but permanence. And for some, that permanence was intolerable. As discussions deepened, unease turned into quiet defiance. A faction within the council, led by figures who had once sworn absolute loyalty, began to question whether Camilla's continued inclusion represented a weakening of tradition. They framed their argument not as betrayal but preservation, claiming that by removing her name, they would protect the integrity of the monarchy for generations to come. Yet beneath that justification lay something more primal: resentment. Camilla's influence had grown too visible, too commanding, too unrestrained for comfort. She was no longer just a consort, she was a force. And that made her dangerous. Every royal decree, they argued, was more than ceremonial ink, it was the living memory of the crown. To remove a name from those documents was to erase it from history itself. But to leave it untouched, they warned, would cement a legacy that could overshadow those yet to come. The council's language was careful, diplomatic, polished, but beneath the marble politeness ran the pulse of rebellion. Meanwhile, Camilla's defenders held their ground with a quiet fury. They reminded the room of her loyalty, her endurance through years of scrutiny and scorn, her unwavering support through Charles's reign. But even as they spoke, they knew the tide was shifting. The whispers were spreading faster than they could be contained. Files went missing. Drafts of decrees were mysteriously altered. Old allies turned silent, avoiding eye contact in the hallways. Outside the palace walls, none of this was known. Yet those who had served long enough recognized the signs of crisis. The tension in the air felt familiar, the same kind that preceded every royal upheaval in history. The crown had survived wars, divorces, scandals, and abdications. But this was different. This was a quiet coup. In the end, it wasn't the noise of public scandal that threatened to shake the monarchy, it was the silence of those rooms, the sound of restrained voices plotting change behind heavy oak doors. The Royal Council's decision was being prepared, and once the ink touched the page, there would be no turning back. But as the whispers grew louder, one royal insider realized the council's decision wasn't just about Camilla's name, it was about rewriting the monarchy's future. It was just after midnight when the black cars arrived at Clarence House. Curtains drawn, phones confiscated, and guards sworn to silence. This was no ordinary gathering. Inside, 12 of the most powerful figures in the monarchy faced a moral and political crossroads. Their decision could preserve the crown or destroy it. What began as a discussion of protocol soon spiraled into accusations, fear, and betrayal. The air inside was dense, heavy with the weight of unspoken truth. Each person seated at that long mahogany table knew the magnitude of what they were about to discuss, yet no one dared to be the first to speak it aloud. Among those present were senior courtiers, legal advisors, and hereditary peers, each bound by oath, yet privately divided by loyalty. The king's private secretary presided with a cold composure, his eyes scanning the room as if measuring every heartbeat. Across from him, the Lord Chamberlain sat motionless, his hands clasped tightly, concealing a tremor that betrayed his unease. There was no mistaking the purpose of this midnight assembly. It was to address what had become an open secret among the highest circles of power, the question of Queen Camilla's place within the monarchy's future. For months, the Queen's influence had grown quietly but undeniably. Her voice reached beyond ceremonial duties, shaping appointments, advising on internal affairs, and according to some, even swaying the king's tone on constitutional matters. Public standing, one advisor phrased delicately, but everyone in that room knew what he truly meant. Her power had begun to eclipse her station. To those loyal to tradition, that was unacceptable. The monarchy, another member warned, is not built for two sovereign minds. The discussion turned sharp. Those who had once defended her now questioned the wisdom of her continued visibility. One reformist leaned forward, voice measured but icy. Her inclusion in every decree weakens the lineage. If this continues, history will remember her before it remembers him. A murmur of agreement followed, but others recoiled. You forget her loyalty, one of the loyalists countered. She carried this crown through storms you couldn't survive. The exchange grew volatile accusations, laced with personal bitterness. Each side believed they were protecting the monarchy, but both feared the same truth, that their king's heart had blurred the line between devotion and duty. Then came the proposal that silenced the room. The royal legal advisor unfolded a single sheet of parchment and placed it before them. A revision to all future royal decrees, he declared. Her Majesty's name will no longer accompany the king's signature, for the protection of the crown. The words landed like a verdict. No one moved, but every gaze shifted toward the king's seat, empty, yet omnipresent. It wasn't just a vote about language or law, it was about erasing a woman's mark from the living record of power. The debate fractured the room completely. Reformists called it preservation, loyalists called it treason. Old friendships began to fracture under the strain of principle and fear. The younger members of the council, once silent observers, began taking sides. The sound of their rising voices echoed through the chamber, a storm contained only by the walls of Clarence House. Somewhere, deep in the palace, a clock struck one, its chime punctuating every bitter word like a warning. And yet, beneath the surface, there was something darker, a shared knowledge that no decision here could remain buried for long. Too many eyes watched from the shadows, too many secrets teetered on the edge of exposure. The council, unaware, was already being watched. But just when the council seemed divided beyond repair, a sealed envelope was slid under the door bearing the royal cipher of someone they never expected. No one knew who wrote it. The letter arrived without a signature, yet its words carried the weight of a crown. For the survival of the monarchy, her name must fade. Every council member froze. Some saw it as divine warning, others as a veiled threat. But what none of them realized, this letter wasn't just written about Camilla. It was written because of her. The parchment lay in the center of the table, trembling under the weight of silence. 12 men and women who had built their lives on loyalty now sat paralyzed, afraid to even breathe near the words that could append everything. The ink was fresh, the tone deliberate, cold, measured, and terrifyingly precise. Whoever had written it didn't speak like a journalist or a dissenter. This was someone who understood the language of royal power, someone who knew exactly how the monarchy functioned from within its bloodstream. Every line of that letter reeked of familiarity, phrases only a handful of insiders could have crafted. The message wasn't long, but it struck like a sword. It warned of mounting public unrest, of spiritual imbalance within the crown, and of a reputation eroding under the shadow of misplaced affection. Every sentence was laced with both accusation and prophecy. The author claimed that for the monarchy to endure, Queen Camilla's name must vanish not from the headlines, but from the history books themselves. The letter didn't call for her resignation or exile, it demanded erasure. A chill rippled through the room. The Lord Chamberlain's voice cracked first, asking what everyone else was too afraid to. Is this a threat? But before anyone could answer, the king's private secretary spoke, voice low and steady. No, he said. It's a command. Someone whispered that it had to be a forgery. Another swore it was written by a former courtier, perhaps someone bitter or dismissed. Yet the deeper they read, the less plausible those theories became. There were details inside, small, cutting details that only someone close to Charles could know. Private remarks repeated word for word. Subtle allusions to moments that had never been public. Even the phrasing mirrored how the king himself drafted internal decrees. That realization made the room go still again. A councilwoman finally broke the silence. then we're not dealing with a stranger. We're dealing with one of our own. The weight of those words settled like a stone in the room. The idea that betrayal could come from inside the royal circle wasn't new, but this was different. This wasn't ambition or revenge. This was strategy, precision, and calculation. Whoever wrote it wasn't trying to destroy the monarchy, they believed they were saving it. As the letter was passed from hand to trembling hand, the emotional toll deepened. For some, it evoked guilt. For others, righteous fury. But underneath every reaction was a single unspoken fear. What if the letter was right? What if the monarchy's survival truly depended on removing her? The thought lingered, corrosive and irresistible. Outside, the world slept unaware that the balance of royal power had begun to shift in the dead of night. Inside those walls, loyalty began to warp into suspicion. Who among them could have written it? Who stood to gain from Camilla's disappearance from royal history? The council's discussion turned into murmured accusation and denial, but the damage was already done. The letter had planted something far more dangerous than doubt. It had sown conviction. One by one, the members realized that the question was no longer whether Camilla's name should be erased, but when. And as the ink on the letter dried, one name echoed in the room, a name no one dared say aloud, yet everyone suspected. The council searched for answers, but all trails led inward. There were whispers that one of Charles's own bloodline had turned against Camilla. Some said it was William, desperate to preserve the throne's purity. Others murmured about Catherine, quietly maneuvering behind the scenes. What if this wasn't about morality, but positioning? As the council's tension reached breaking point, one truth became undeniable. This wasn't just a political coup. It was a family war. The royal family had endured centuries of conflict, wars, divorces, abdications, but betrayal from within had always been its deepest wound. And now, that wound was reopening. The letter's arrival had left the council paranoid and fractured, each member searching for the unseen hand that had pushed them toward rebellion. Theories multiplied like fire, each more dangerous than the last. It wasn't the press, nor the politicians, nor even the public. No, the tone, the phrasing, the precision, it all felt too close to home. Someone who knew how the monarchy bled had drawn the blade. Old resentments resurfaced in every whisper. Camilla's marriage had never truly united the family, it had merely silenced the storm long enough for it to gather strength again. For years, William had tolerated her presence with the practiced politeness of a man trained to conceal discomfort. But those close to him knew the truth. He saw her not as his father's partner, but as a living reminder of the chaos that had defined his youth. Her growing influence within the palace, her quiet authority in private meetings, her proximity to decisions once reserved for the king alone, it all stirred something fierce within him. Pride. Protectiveness. Perhaps even fear that history was repeating itself. Yet William's restraint only fueled more suspicion. The council wondered if his silence was strategy, a calculated patience, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim the narrative. And where there was William, there was Catherine. The princess, ever composed, ever observant, had mastered the art of quiet diplomacy. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her calm presence was power enough. Those who underestimated her mistook grace for passivity. But within royal circles, they knew Catherine understood the long game. Her influence reached where Charles's authority could not. She listened when others commanded. She soothed when others schemed. And some now believed that she more than anyone was capable of orchestrating something so delicate, so devastating, it could change the monarchy forever. Around the table, as the council members argued in hushed but venomous tones, those names William and Catherine kept resurfacing. If not them, then who? One of the advisors snapped. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't accusation anymore, it was dread. For if the betrayal had come from the heir himself, then the monarchy's fracture wasn't political. It was hereditary. In the midst of this growing chaos stood Charles, torn between love and lineage. Every word that reached him, every rumor carried through the palace corridors, pulled him further into torment. To suspect his son, to doubt his daughter-in-law, was to question the very bloodline he was sworn to protect. But to ignore the whispers would be to gamble with his reign. His heart was already divided between the woman he had fought the world to love, and the son he was destined to prepare for power. The line between loyalty and treason was fading. Each decision made in the council chambers felt like one step closer to collapse. Even those who once defended Camilla now hesitated, their faith eroded by the constant drip of rumor and fear. The betrayal no longer had a face, it had become a presence, a ghost haunting every word, every glance, every meeting. And while the council argued behind closed doors, Camilla herself began to sense that something far darker was unfolding beneath her feet. When Camilla received a call meant for someone else, the ground beneath her shifted. "The vote is tonight," the voice whispered before hanging up. For a moment, the queen consort stood frozen, realizing the truth: her name, her legacy, her place beside Charles were all hanging by a thread. But Camilla had survived scandal before. What they didn't know was that she wasn't going down quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla's hand trembled slightly as she lowered the phone, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened window. The world outside remained unaware, still believing in the illusion of royal unity. But within the palace walls, betrayal was unfolding like a carefully scripted tragedy. She knew that tone: the urgency, the fear. It wasn't gossip. It was confirmation. The council was preparing to strike, and she was the target. In that moment, 1,000 memories crashed over her. The headlines, the hatred, the whispered judgments that once followed her every step. She had fought her way into acceptance, clawed through decades of resentment to stand beside the man she loved. Every insult endured, every public sneer survived. It had all been for this. To finally be recognized. To finally belong. And now, after everything, they were plotting to erase her as though she had never existed. Her first instinct was disbelief. Could they truly be so cruel? But the longer she thought, the clearer it became. Of course they could. The royal family had always been built on control and preservation, not compassion. They protected the institution, not the individuals within it. She had once admired that strength, but now she saw it for what it truly was: a weapon, sharpened and ready to be used against her. Camilla's mind raced. If the council succeeded, her name would vanish from every decree, every document, every trace of royal authority. She would become invisible, a silent partner erased from history. And worse, Charles would be powerless to stop it without risking the throne itself. They weren't attacking her out of duty. They were doing it out of fear of what her presence represented. To them, she was a reminder of defiance, of imperfection, of love that defied royal rules. But Camilla had learned long ago that pity never saved anyone in this world. Survival demanded calculation. And no one knew palace politics better than she did. Behind her calm exterior, her mind began to move like a chessboard, calculating allies, weighing risks, anticipating every countermove. There were still those who owed her favors. People whose secrets she had quietly protected over the years. Servants, aides, even one or two council members who remembered the nights she had shielded them from scandal. They might not love her, but they feared crossing her. And fear was often stronger than loyalty. For a brief moment, her resolve wavered. She thought of Charles, of the man who had risked everything to make her his queen. He had promised her protection, permanence, peace. But could he protect her now? Or would the same forces that once broke him now turn him against her too? The question lingered like smoke, impossible to escape. Yet beneath her sorrow, a new fire began to burn, a fierce, steady determination that had carried her through every humiliation. They wanted her gone quietly, to bow out with grace, to disappear without protest. But Camilla was done bowing. This time, she would not beg for mercy or acceptance. She would fight not just for herself, but for the power she had rightfully earned. The council thought they understood her. They thought they were removing a liability. But what they were about to face was a woman who had mastered the art of survival. And as the council prepared to cast their votes, Camilla prepared her own counterattack, one that could bring the monarchy to its knees. Rain hammered the palace windows as 12 council members gathered around the ancient oak table. Each held a sealed envelope, their faces pale with the gravity of what they were about to do. A vote to decide whether the queen consort's name should vanish from all future decrees. Every tick of the clock was a countdown to betrayal, and every glance a silent confession. The air felt electric, heavy with history. For centuries, this council had defended the monarchy from the outside world, but tonight, it was protecting it from within. No press, no records, no witnesses. The secrecy was absolute. The meeting had been sanctioned under an ancient royal clause allowing internal votes of preservation, a relic from a time when the monarchy had faced civil collapse. But tonight, it wasn't the people threatening the throne. It was its own beating heart. Each member of the council carried the weight of something sacred, and yet poisonous. The decision to erase the queen consort, to strike her name from the living language of royal authority. The room was divided. On one side stood the loyalists, those who saw Camilla as the king's anchor, his strength through public scrutiny and private despair. They argued that removing her name would not only disgrace the crown, but humiliate Charles himself. To erase his wife was to deny the very foundation of his reign. Yet across the table, the reformists countered with sharp conviction. The monarchy survives only through image, one said, his voice trembling with restrained passion. And her image, whatever her devotion, has become our greatest weakness. His words echoed like thunder, met by a silence that said what no one dared admit, that perhaps he was right. Each envelope contained a single choice: retain or remove. They had all sworn secrecy, yet betrayal was already in the air. A young aide, nervous and out of place, had been tasked with collecting the votes. He tried to hide the shaking of his hands, unaware that his every move was being watched. The Lord Chamberlain gave him a nod, and he began gathering the envelopes one by one. But what no one knew was that the aide had already broken his oath. Moments before the session began, he had sent a message to an unnamed contact beyond the palace walls, a message containing 4 simple words: "The vote is happening." As the ballots were opened, time seemed to slow. 1 retain. 2. Then 3. A remove. Another. And then another. Each paper unfolded like a confession, each stroke of ink slicing through alliances forged over decades. No one dared look at one another. The final count hung in the air like a ghost. 7-5. The motion passed. Camilla's name would be removed. For a long moment, no one spoke. The oldest member of the council finally exhaled, his voice barely more than a whisper. So it is done. The words carried centuries of tradition collapsing into a single act of defiance. The royal charter would be amended quietly, the new decrees printed without her name. To the public, it would appear as nothing more than procedural evolution. But those in the room knew the truth: they had just erased a queen. The ink was prepared, the decision recorded in perfect calligraphy, sealed with the crown's insignia. Some felt relief, others guilt. But all shared the same haunting awareness that they had crossed a line from which there could be no return. Outside, the storm raged harder, as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to treason disguised as duty. And as the clock struck midnight, one of the aides slipped away, clutching a copy of the final decree, proof of what had just transpired. It would not remain secret for long. But as the ink dried on the council's decision, news of the betrayal was already racing toward one man who would not forgive it: King Charles himself. The message reached him at dawn: "It's done. Her name is gone." For a moment, the king said nothing. Then, the palace trembled. Charles's fury wasn't the roar of a monarch, it was the heartbreak of a man betrayed by his own blood. His trust shattered, his composure lost. He demanded names, confessions, and resignations. What began as political maneuvering had now awakened the wrath of a king with nothing left to lose. Charles had faced storms before: public scrutiny, personal loss, and decades of doubt, but this was different. This was an ambush from within his own circle. The council, handpicked by him, had dared to erase the woman who had stood beside him through exile and redemption. The betrayal cut deeper than politics, it was personal. As he read through the document, the final decree, stripped of her name, his hand shook not with fear, but with disbelief. The institution he had fought his whole life to preserve had turned against him in the dead of night. The ink was barely dry, and yet it burned like fire in his veins. His first command was simple: accountability. He summoned every senior member of the council to his private chamber. When they arrived, their faces pale and unreadable, he looked at them not as colleagues but as conspirators. "Who authorized this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with restrained rage. No one spoke. The silence was more incriminating than any confession. "You signed it," he said, pointing to the parchment. "You removed my wife from the royal decrees, my wife." The word hung in the air, torn between authority and agony. Still, no one dared to speak. It wasn't long before the names began to surface in whispered fragments. A senior advisor claimed it had been a collective decision. Another insisted the vote was meant to protect the crown from instability. Each excuse stoked the king's fury further. "Protect the crown," he spat. "You have endangered it." He turned away, fists clenched, his eyes glistening with both rage and grief. "You think the monarchy survives through obedience? It survives through loyalty, and you have none." But behind the politics lurked something far more dangerous: suspicion. Charles had heard rumors long before this moment, whispers of dissent brewing among the younger royals. The letter, the secrecy, the speed of the vote, it all pointed to influence beyond the council itself. His mind, unwilling but desperate, turned toward his son. Could William have known? Could Catherine have stood by while his wife was erased from history? The thought pierced him like a blade. He had always feared that his reign and his son's destiny could not coexist peacefully. Now, that fear began to look like prophecy. The press, ever vigilant, caught scent of the turmoil almost instantly. By afternoon, headlines hinted at unrest within the palace, a constitutional divide, and tension between the king and the next generation. What had begun as a secret vote was now bleeding into the public eye. Royal aides scrambled to contain the fallout, but the damage was irreversible. The monarchy's fractures, once hidden behind formality and ceremony, were now visible to the world. Through it all, Camilla remained silent. Advisors begged her to withdraw from the spotlight, to avoid public comment until the storm passed. But she refused. "If I step back now," she told them coldly, "they win." Her defiance only fueled Charles's anger, not at her, but at the machine that had sought to break them apart. He saw in her silence not weakness, but strength, the same quiet resilience that had once carried him through exile and disgrace. And now, as the monarchy itself began to fracture, that strength became his only anchor. Charles's fury burned through the day, but as night fell, it transformed into something darker. Resolve. If the council could erase her with a pen, then he would fight with a crown. The king who had once preached patience was gone. In his place stood a man ready to reclaim power by any means necessary. The whispers had become war cries, and the palace halls that once echoed with ceremony now throbbed with defiance. But even as Charles sought to restore order, another revelation would soon strike, a discovery that made the council's vote look like a mere prelude. Buried deep in the royal archives was a forgotten clause, one that gave the reigning monarch absolute power to overturn council decrees. But there was a catch. Doing so would trigger an automatic review of the king's mental fitness to rule. In other words, to save Camilla's name, Charles would have to risk his own crown. And the council knew he wouldn't dare. Or so they thought. The discovery came by accident, or perhaps by fate. One of Charles's oldest legal advisors, combing through the centuries-old royal charter for precedents, stumbled upon it, a clause so ancient it had not been cited in over 200 years. It was written in the formal Latin of a bygone monarchy, but its meaning was unmistakable. The king, under exceptional circumstance, held the right to nullify any council decision without consultation. Absolute power in theory, but absolute peril in practice. The revelation sent ripples through the palace. Those loyal to Charles saw in it a lifeline, a way to reverse the council's betrayal and restore Camilla's name to its rightful place. But those aligned with the council saw something far more dangerous. A monarch who, if provoked, could dismantle the balance of power that had kept the monarchy intact. The lawyers warned of consequences. If Charles invoked the clause, his judgment would immediately come under parliamentary scrutiny. The council would have the right to question his sanity, his capacity to govern, and his loyalty to constitutional restraint. In short, he could save his wife or save his throne, but not both. The king's advisors begged him to stay silent. "You must let it go," one pleaded. "You cannot risk destabilizing the monarchy over this." But Charles could not find peace in silence. Every document he read, every headline that reached his desk, felt like a personal wound. Camilla's erasure had been orchestrated not by enemies abroad, but by the hands of those who once bowed before him. How could he rule a nation that had turned its own council against him? How could he look his wife in the eyes knowing he had done nothing to defend her? That night, the palace was quieter than it had ever been. Charles sat alone, the charter open before him. The faded ink, the seal of his ancestors, it all seemed to stare back, daring him to act. He remembered the oaths he had taken to uphold tradition, to serve the crown, to protect the institution above himself. Yet in his heart, a question burned. When does duty become cowardice? Was the crown truly worth protecting if it demanded the sacrifice of love, loyalty, and truth? Camilla entered quietly, her voice breaking the silence. She had heard the rumors of the clause and the consequences it carried. "Don't do this," she whispered, standing behind him. "You'll lose everything. They'll say you're unfit. They'll take the throne from you." Her words trembled, not from fear of power, but fear of loss, the loss of the man she had already seen broken once by the weight of duty. But Charles didn't look away from the charter. "They've already taken everything," he murmured. "All that's left is choice." The following morning, his closest aide found the king still awake, surrounded by torn pages and sealed letters. He had made his decision, though no one yet knew which path he would take. For the first time in years, his resolve was unshakable. The king, who had always yielded to counsel, now prepared to stand against it, alone if he must. And when dawn broke over Windsor, Charles made his choice, a choice that would alter royal history forever. In the Grand Hall, with every royal watching, Charles stood before the council. "Erase her name," he declared, "and you erase me." His voice, trembling with both fury and conviction, echoed through the room. What followed was not the calm diplomacy of a monarch, it was the raw defiance of a man who had finally reached his breaking point. The council sat in stunned silence, their faces pale beneath the weight of his words. For decades, they had known Charles as a man of compromise, a ruler of restraint. But this was not the same king they had once manipulated. This was a man ready to gamble his crown for love. He had spent the night sleepless, torn between the burden of history and the ache of loyalty. The royal charter lay open before him, its ancient language offering both power and peril. When morning came, his decision was already made. There would be no retreat, no negotiation. He summoned the council to Windsor's hall, a place meant for ceremony, now turned into a battlefield of words. As the members entered, one by one, they expected a chastened king, perhaps even a broken one. Instead, they were met with a monarch transformed. Charles began slowly, his tone steady but sharp. "You claim to protect the crown," he said, "but what you protect is comfort, the illusion of purity, the myth of control. You erased her name to preserve the monarchy, yet in doing so, you've poisoned its soul." His eyes burned with a fire none of them had seen before. "If her name does not belong in the history of this kingdom," he continued, "then neither does mine." Gasps filled the room. No one dared move, no one dared breathe. And then, before any could respond, he took the royal decree newly printed, Camilla's name omitted, and with a pen of his own, he wrote it back in. Every stroke of ink felt like a rebellion. With a single signature, Charles shattered the council's authority and rewrote the course of royal precedent. The act was both breathtaking and dangerous. "This decree," he said firmly, "is not born of law or politics, it is born of truth." Some of the loyalists lowered their heads, ashamed. Others, especially the reformists, exchanged dark glances. They knew what this meant. The king had invoked a power that challenged the entire foundation of constitutional monarchy. And once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. Across the room, Camilla's eyes filled with tears, part relief, part fear. She understood the cost of what he had just done. His love had saved her, but it might destroy him. Their victory felt fragile, almost tragic, suspended between devotion and disaster. The council rose in quiet uproar. Some walked out in protest, others demanded intervention. "You've endangered the throne," one shouted. "No," Charles replied coldly, "I've restored its humanity." But even as he spoke those words, the tremors of rebellion had already begun. Within hours, the palace walls could no longer contain the secret. The press had caught wind of the confrontation, headlines exploding with tales of royal defiance, and a monarchy divided. The public split overnight, some praising Charles for his courage, others calling it a reckless act of love that threatened centuries of stability. Polls shifted, alliances faltered, and whispers spread that senior figures were preparing to challenge his authority. For the first time in modern history, a monarch's heart had become the battleground for a nation's future. But Charles showed no sign of regret. As night fell and the corridors of Windsor grew still, he stood by the window, the decree beside him, Camilla's name shining in bold, defiant ink. He had won, but the victory was a fragile one. The cost of his choice had not yet been paid, but its shadow loomed already across the palace. In saving the woman he loved, he had awakened forces that could not be controlled, forces that would test the limits of loyalty, family, and power itself. And as the palace curtains closed that night, one truth echoed through every corridor: this wasn't the end of the war. It was only the beginning.